What did you like to do when you were young? I was lucky to live in Southern California, and my parents took me often to Disneyland. So, 60 years later, that's still the happiest place for me. But my friend Sherry is quite different. She does not like amusement parks, and actually has called Disney a no-fly zone. But she loves to read. She told me she was a quiet girl whose only hobby was reading. But her family had no budget for children's books, so she became a newspaper worm. The news took her all over the world, and that made her feel connected to the world. Actually, the newspaper was her only reading material. She also liked to read her brother's geography and history textbooks. The books, 2 and 3 years ahead of her curriculum, were like novels. She learned about China and world history, the continents and oceans, and when she learned how the Americas were separated by the Panama Canal, she asked her dad about the canals, and he told her it was an engineering wonder, and it was built with locks, and the ships would move up and down like taking an elevator. The canal would save 18 days and 8,000 miles for ships going between the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Wow. Can you imagine the pictures that were painted in Sherry's mind? The canals connected not only the oceans and seas, but also the books she read about the earth we stand on. To a 10-year-old girl who lived in a small military village, going through the canals became a part of her dreams. When Sherry was 15 in 1979, she watched President Carter signing papers giving the Panama Canal back to Panama. She searched news articles trying to figure out why the United States gave such a valuable and strategic important canal to Panama, but she could not find any answers. Remember, it was 1979. Other than a few newspapers praising the right thing historical event, the paper's emphasis was on how the United States paid $50 million in 1903. Then an additional $375 million was spent between 1903 and 1914 on building it. A 2022 study estimated the Panama Canal's annual profit to be $2 billion, while the United States got only $1 when they handed the canal to Panama. You probably can't imagine how this news affected this 15-year-old high school girl. The U.S. spent money, time, and over 5,000 lives to connect the world. They built this engineering wonder for the whole world to use, and they selflessly gave it to Panama, its neighbor. So, 10 years ago on November 3, 2014, Sherry booked her first Panama Canal cruise, and again in 2017. On her first canal cruise, she learned how the initial project run by France failed, how 40% of the French workforce lost their lives to yellow fever and tropical diseases, how the U.S. bought the land and then completed the project from France, and how the canal, after its completion in 1914, changed the world. It was a wonderful trip. From Los Angeles, and they visited Mexico, Nicaragua, and Costa Rica before spending the whole day passing through the canal. Alongside the canal, they saw tropical plants on both sides and the huge man-made lake. We learned it takes 50 million gallons of fresh water from the lake to send just one ship through the canal. Or you could say it takes 500,000 Panamanians' daily water use to send a ship through. After the perfect day sailing from the Pacific to the Atlantic, They arrived in Colombia before passing through the Caribbean to reach Florida. Although Sherry enjoyed every port she visited, she didn't understand why they didn't stop by Panama. In 2016, she crossed the canal again, and this time she jumped on a taxi and visited Colón. And she was quite surprised on what she saw when she passed by some pretty rundown areas near the port. And some areas of Panama City have a high crime rate. Travelers are advised to exercise a high degree of caution, even today. If she sounds surprised now, imagine how she felt when she drove through Panama. Luckily, her taxi driver was not only knowledgeable but also patient in answering all her questions. He told her the local economy improved a lot after Panama took over the canal. Although poverty and crime are still problems, he said the canal profits are supposed to go to Panamanians, and hopefully, more profits will come with the completion of the new canal. Sherry was in shock when he told her about the December 1989 invasion by the United States. She asked him, "Invasion? I thought Noriega was a drug lord, a dictator. I thought the U.S. came here to help Panama. Why do you call that an invasion?" He said, "Because this is our country." The invasion started in December 1989 and concluded in late January 1990 with the surrender of Noriega. The United States was criticized by many countries. The U.S. lost 23 soldiers, while 513 Panamanians died. After Sherry's second visit to Panama, she left on a sad note. The canal is still grand, and the cruise was still fun. But what she saw led her to find out more about the Panama Canal. On her second crossing, she met a veteran who served in the Panama Canal zone for many years. She asked him, "Why did the U.S. give the canal back?" He said, "The U.S. didn't want the canal. It's more trouble than it's worth." More trouble than $2 billion of profits a year? How could that be? If the U.S. did not need the canal, we would not have paid so much to buy and build it over 100 years ago, right? Actually, our history digging showed that the United States saved $30 million from the initial purchase when Colombia asked for $40 million for the canal land, while the U.S. was only willing to pay $10 million. But when the U.S.-backed provincial Panama rebels declared independence from Colombia, the U.S. quickly gave $10 million to Panama and bought the land rights outright. But conflicts between the United States-owned canal zone and Panamanians has been non-stop. Panamanians sought to get more from the original treaty than the U.S. was willing to give. There were multiple adjustments to the original agreement during the treaty negotiations of 1936, 1942, and 1955. But these talks did not solve the problems. For the U.S., the money was paid when the treaty was signed. But the Panamanians asked, "What does in perpetuity mean? Is it like marriage vows? Till death do us part?" But even marriages can be dissolved when one wants out. The problems between the U.S. and Panamanians reached a fever pitch in 1959 and again in 1964. In 1964, riots killed 20 people and destroyed $2 million worth of property. Panama broke off relations with the U.S. and appealed to the United Nations. On December the 18th, 1964, President Johnson issued a statement announcing that the United States would proceed with plans for a sea-level canal and would negotiate with Panama for a new treaty to replace the Treaty of 1903. Although that new treaty never happened, It seemed to show concerns over the current freshwater canal system. Then in 1968, when Panama had a new leader, Arias demanded that the U.S. give the canal back immediately. Arias was not in power long, but the new military leader also demanded that the U.S. military move out. Eventually, the Torrijos-Carter treaties settled the matter in 1977. Panama would get the canal back in 1999, and now the canal is managed and operated by the Panamanian government-owned Panama Canal Authority. To accommodate bigger ships and higher transportation needs, a new, wider canal opened on June 26, 2016, and on January 19, 2024, Sherry and friends passed through the new canal. However, they couldn't have passed the canal at a worse time. The severe drought since 2023 forced a 20% reduction in traffic. That not only will leave the Panama Canal Authority $200 million in the red for 2024, it has disturbed global traffic big time. The ship's canal cruising narrator told us the drought forced canal jams, creating a priority bidding system. With a starting bid of $100,000, ships can bid to get front-of-the-line pass for the following week. Recently, the bid skyrocketed to $4.5 million, as some ships have a do-or-die contract if they can't meet the delivery date. The narrator assured us that we still have priority over most other ships, since cruise ships prepay their crossing fee 1 year in advance. He went on to explain to them how the Canal Authority recycled fresh water to fight against the drought, but how salt water would flow into the locks during the operation, and how the heavier seawater now gets into the lakes at unforeseen speeds, and how, if the drought persists, it will affect 2.5 million people's drinking water. People say knowledge is power, but sometimes it hurts when you see the truth. Sherry felt bad for the one bidding $4.5 million to pass, knowing it will be you and I that pay the ultimate price. If the inflation does not hit us hard enough, the shortage of food will. And what if the drought persists? What should we do? Unlike the two prior canal cruises, Sherry left with a heavy heart. She felt bad for taking the spot of a ship desperately needing to cross the canal, and she felt bad for the fresh water draining out to make their crossing. Sherry would hope that all cruise lines would stop crossing the canal and allow only the cargo ships to cross. After all, we could still watch the canal crossing from the lock station. Can they do that? We don't know. But we know if they only allow 20 ships to cross the canal, cruising for pleasure should be put aside till we have the luxury to do so. This is Ken Peters. Thank you for watching.